That clock was an extraordinary and sinister piece of art, a masterpiece that looked like a macabre relic from the past. It was there, displayed in an old auction house, among a myriad of vintage items. Its silver face, adorned with intricate engravings, was surrounded by raised Roman numerals, and glistening gold decorated its hands. I was a collector of vintage items, and the clock had caught my attention like a bolt from the blue. It wasn't just its beauty that drew me in, but something deeper and darker that resided within it. I had decided that I had to own it, despite the warning from the seller, who seemed troubled by its presence. Taking it home was the first step in my journey into a disturbing spiral of events. The cursed clock seemed to radiate a sinister aura, which grew with each passing minute. Its ticking had an irregular rhythm, not as regular as a clock should be. It was as if it concealed something beneath the surface, a hidden pulse that only I could perceive. The nights became my personal nightmare. When I was alone, the clock seemed to communicate with me through its irregular ticking. It was like a faint voice whispering dark thoughts into my mind, sowing the seeds of fear. I began to see elusive shadows moving about the house, shadows I couldn't identify. I felt constantly watched, as if the clock had opened a portal to something unknown and unsettling. My sleep became tormented and sleepless, and I began to seek answers. I started to investigate the origin of the cursed clock, and what I discovered was disturbing. The clock had once belonged to a notorious black magician in the 19th century, a man known for his experiments on the fringes of dark magic. He had created that clock as a kind of demonic talisman, intended to reveal the depths of the human mind. I also learned that the clock had brought misfortune to all its previous owners, leading them to tragic fates. It had been stolen, sold, pawned, and always ended up returning. Its curse seemed incurable, a dark entity that had taken hold of every soul that possessed it. However, the curse of the clock wasn't limited to just bringing bad luck. I realized that it had the power to reveal my deepest thoughts, even those I tried to hide from myself. I began to live in a constant state of paranoia, fearing that someone or something was peering into my mind through the clock. One night, as I sat next to the clock in the dimness of my house, I heard an evil laughter that seemed to come from nowhere. It was a subtle and unsettling sound that sent chills down my spine. I was frozen, holding my breath, as the laughter grew closer. Then suddenly the clock shook violently, making a deafening metallic noise, and it stopped. Its hands remained frozen exactly at midnight. In that moment, I feared that the clock had finally met its end, that the curse had prevailed. But when I looked up, I witnessed an eerie scene. From inside the clock emerged a dark figure, as dark as the night itself. The figure was tall and slender, and it seemed to emit a kind of malevolent darkness. It resembled the black magician I had read about in my research on the cursed clock. My eyes were fixed on that figure, frozen in terror. It was as if evil incarnate had materialized from within the clock, and I understood that the very entity of the curse was taking shape before my eyes. The dark figure stood against the dim light of the clock, its face hidden by a hood that cast a deep shadow over its expression. Nevertheless, I could sense its malevolence, a dark intensity that made me tremble from within. With a fluid motion, the dark figure seized the clock with a dark hand, and the object seemed to melt like sand in its fingers. In an instant, the clock disappeared, becoming a part of the figure itself. Without uttering a word, the dark figure slowly turned towards me, and its gaze seemed to pierce my soul. I felt as though I was being examined, scrutinized in minute detail, and I feared that my mind was laid bare before that dark entity. Then, with an equally fluid motion, the dark figure melted into the dimness of the room, merging with the darkness of the night. I stood there, motionless and horrified, with the terror that had taken hold of me. From that night on, the cursed clock vanished from my life, but the horror it had brought remained. The dark figure became a constant presence in my dreams, a living nightmare that haunted me night after night. I had learned the lesson in a brutal way. Some curses were so deeply rooted in the fabric of reality that even the attempt to exorcise them could unleash the evil they contained. That cursed clock, with its ancient curse, had brought forth a dark presence that would continue to haunt me forever. My life became an eternal quest for answers, for a way to end that curse. But my encounter with the dark figure had taught me that evil was a much darker power than I had ever imagined, and that its roots extended much deeper than I could have ever fathomed. I would live with the constant awareness that darkness could take many forms, and that the struggle against evil could lead to tragic outcomes.
I had always been fascinated by the paranormal. I spent hours reading ghost stories, exploring abandoned places, and searching for mysterious objects in thrift stores. It was as if I needed to confirm the existence of a world beyond our own, a world populated by unknown forces. One cold autumn morning, I found myself in one of those dusty stores, surrounded by old furniture and forgotten objects. As I browsed through the shelves, a small porcelain doll caught my eye. It had delicate porcelain skin, a blue dress, and golden hair. It looked ancient and precious, but something about its blue eyes unsettled me. It felt like it was staring into my soul. I asked the shopkeeper about its history, but all he knew was that it had been brought into the store by a customer with no specific backstory or origin. It was too good of a find to pass up, so I bought it. Bringing the doll home, I couldn't take my eyes off its piercing gaze. That evening, as I sat at my study desk, I began to hear strange noises coming from the adjacent room. It sounded like the soft footsteps on the wooden floor. I was sure there was no one else in the house. Anxious, I approached the door. When I opened it, I found the porcelain doll on the floor, standing on its own. It shouldn't have been there. I was certain I had left it in a corner of the table. I picked up the doll and placed it back where it belonged, but its gaze seemed even more menacing. The following nights grew increasingly unsettling. Every time I went to sleep, I heard the rustling of its porcelain dress, as if it were moving about the room. The doll seemed to move on its own, and it began appearing in my dreams. These were not ordinary dreams. They were terrifying visions of darkness and horror. My obsession with the paranormal had now turned into a struggle for my own sanity. I couldn't ignore the fact that the doll was cursed. I decided to seek help from a specialist in cursed objects. He told me the doll could be possessed by an evil entity and needed to be sealed. He handed me a small religious item, a sacred icon, and explained how to use it to seal the doll. I had to recite prayers and blessings while holding the icon close to the doll. It was my only hope to free myself from this curse. Sitting at my desk with the sacred icon in my hands, I began to recite the prayers with unwavering determination. The icon emitted a faint light as the porcelain doll reacted increasingly unsettling. Its movements became frantic, as if the malevolent entity inside it realized my intent to break free from the curse. The doll shook violently on the table, its small porcelain hands beating against the wood with growing force. It seemed to be desperately resisting the prayers and the sacred energy of the icon. My heart raced as I continued to recite the prayers, my voice trembling but resolute. I could feel the tension in the air, and the room seemed to vibrate with malevolent energy. The doll emitted a desperate, demonic scream, echoing through the room and sending shivers down my spine. I was determined not to give in, not to let that malevolent creature win. I kept reciting the prayers as the sacred icon shone with increasing intensity. The doll twisted and contorted, as if the dark entity inside it was fighting to hold its ground. Finally, as the first light of dawn streamed through the windows, I heard the doll emit a demonic hiss, followed by complete silence. Its agitation had subsided, and it had finally yielded to the power of the prayers and the sacred object. I was exhausted but relieved. The cursed doll had been defeated, and the curse had lost its grip on me. With a deep sigh, I took the doll to the attic and sealed it in a box, far from my sight, knowing it could no longer bring harm. From that day on, I learned that the power of faith and belief can be a shield against the supernatural evil. My experience with the cursed doll taught me that there are forces beyond human understanding, but determination and faith can help us confront them. My obsession with the paranormal had led to a battle that I had successfully faced, but I had also discovered how dangerous it could be to delve into the unknown.